also have my co-host, Kayla Bright. And if you guys have been following ORR, you would know that she was our survivor who came and spoke at our most recent live training event. So welcome, Kayla. We're so happy you're here.
Hi.
Kayla is actually a partner of ORR, so she is going to be taking over these lives, which we are so excited about. So she is doing a little training today. And she's going to kill it. She's going to do great.
I'm very excited to be taking
Good. Okay, so we're going to start, and let me lower this so I can see. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Survivor series. We have Jenna McKaye with us. Jenna, we just want to say thank you so much for being with us. We really value your time and your voice and your story. And this platform is completely yours. So I'm going to hand it to you and you can share your story. And then at the end, we will ask questions, any questions that come in, any questions that Kayla or I might have for you. But yeah, thank you so much. We really, really honor you and your time. And the floor is yours.
Thank you guys so much for having me, and I love answering questions, so I'm looking forward to that part.
Yay.
So my name is Jenna, and just a little bit about me now. I am a survivor of trafficking. I survived it 14 years ago when I was 18. I now train law enforcement and hospital staff across the country on how to identify and respond to victims with trauma-informed and victim-centered care. And I also give keynotes sharing my story. And I have a foundation here. I'm in a small town just north of Sacramento in California. And I have a foundation. We assist victims, setting them up with the services and resources they need, a long-term mentorship. And one of the big things we do is provide horse therapy, which was a therapy that really helped me as well. In my healing. So yeah, let me share some of my story. This is the shorter version. But I grew up in Southern California, and I was in a community. I was a kid that you would not picture to become a victim of trafficking. I went to a private Christian school. I had two parents at home. My dad was a farmer and my mom was a teacher. And I had two big sisters. By the time I was in 6th grade, they were both off at college. And at 12 years old, I started playing really competitive volleyball. And when I say, training for volleyball, I mean not backyard, like beach volleyball, barbecue volleyball. Like I had a weight trainer who was a pitcher for the Angels, and I played club and travel. And when I got into high school, started varsity sports, and it was all with the goal to become, to get a scholarship to play in college and follow in one of my big sister's footsteps. And so I could really see where my future was headed. And, junior high and high school, I really didn't have time to get in trouble. Wasn't really interested in boys, really was focused on my sports, had a good group of friends. But I ended up meeting my trafficker in high school. He went to the same school as me, and he was a year older. And so just like I wasn't somebody who you might picture to become a victim, he wasn't somebody that you might picture to become a trafficker. He came from a good family. He moved, he was raised by his grandparents in Washington, but when he was 13, moved to Southern California with his mom and his stepdad. His mom was a successful business owner. His stepdad was a pastor and a chief in the Navy, so from a good family, right? And it was my senior year that I started to really struggle. I started dating him off and on secretly, and my self-esteem really plummeted. The relationship was definitely abusive. And my senior year, my parents were separating, and that was really, really hard for me. I took it really hard. It didn't seem like anybody was talking to me about it. Nobody was there to communicate with me about it. And I started really stressing about college because I had watched my dad help my older sister with the recruiting process in sports and getting scholarships. And moving away with my mom, I felt like I didn't have anybody to support me in that. And so I dropped out of high school and moved in with him. He was a year older and he lived on his own, and he had asked me if I wanted to come. And the way he painted it, like a great picture, like, you know, you can get your GED, or my mom got her GED. Look how successful she is. And, you know, life will be great with me is pretty much what he was telling me. So when I dropped out of high school and moved in with him, I didn't hear from my high school. I went there since kindergarten. None of my coaches, my weight trainer, family members, teachers, nobody was reaching out to me. It felt like there was this assumption and judgment that I was just this bad kid and then I was a runaway. And that really is where the prevention could have happened, because I didn't want to move in with him. I just felt stuck, and I didn't have, you know, the tools that I needed and the people that I needed. I needed adults, and I was 18, but I was a kid, right? I hadn't graduated high school yet. And then once I moved in with him, I started to see really the criminal activity he was involved in. I knew there was some things that he was doing, but I didn't know to the extent. And he wasn't already a trafficker that preyed on me and lured me out of high school. This is something he learned with the people that he was around. And during this time, we got married. It wasn't like a happy occasion. None of my family was there. And he really began the process. That was really it wasn't really to intend to marry me. It was more to have more control over me. And he really began the process of separating me from my support system and my family. And there was 2 trips during this time that were really the red flags that I was going to be trafficked. But I had no education, definitely not on trafficking, but no education really on domestic violence or the signs of abuse. And my idea of domestic violence was if you're being hit. And he wasn't hitting me, so I didn't realize I was in a domestic violence relationship. And it was slowly escalating. And there was a trip to Vegas that we took, and I remember standing in a souvenir shop, and he was outside the front talking to a man that looked like a stereotypical pimp, or somebody involved in a criminal activity, some kind of gang maybe. And I remember watching them and thinking, why is he talking to that guy? And why does it look like he knows him? And I never found out what happened during that conversation, but things did start to change when we got home. There was a trip to Tijuana, Mexico. There was multiple trips, but in this trip in particular, he took me to a club, and in the lobby area, there was a tattoo artist. And like many traffickers do, they brand their victims, and I was tattooed. It was a very traumatic experience. I didn't understand what was happening then, but looking back now, I can see how much force there was. And so these are things that were leading up to before being trafficked. And we lived in an apartment, and this was 2006. The community I was in, it was said to be one of the safest communities at a time. He didn't take me, to another city or another state. I was 15 minutes from the school I grew up in. I was 15 minutes from home, but he did a very good job still separating me and keeping me away. And the first night, I was used to strangers coming to the door because of all the criminal activity he was involved in. And this night he welcomed this man in when he came to our door, and they were standing in the kitchen area talking for a while, and the man kept looking at me, and it felt different. And that was the first night that I was raped and sold. And what happened was, after I looked down the hallway to the front door, and that man that had just raped me handed my husband money. And I laid there just like frozen. And I thought, okay, I know I was just raped, but why is he handing him money? What does that mean? And I grew up with the same movies and documentaries and TV shows as everybody else. So prostitution was Pretty Woman, and trafficking, which I don't even think I've heard of, was that kid chained to a radiator in another country. Like, none of that was occurring for me. So what was this? This is different. I don't even understand. And this is kind of the point of the story where people will often go, they put themselves in those shoes and they go, well, I would have ran. Like, I don't care what would have happened. I would have ran out of that apartment. I would have called 911. And I go, yeah, that occurred to me. I did not want to be there. This is not what I signed up for. But everything that led up to this point, he knew what he was doing. So by this point, my dad, I was working normal jobs during the day, and my dad would come to my work and check on me. Just from the trauma I was already experiencing with him, my looks were really changing. I didn't look well. And my trafficker got a restraining order against my dad. By this point, I had been arrested, getting involved in some of the things that he was involved in. And the police officer that arrested me, he was putting the handcuffs on me, and he looked at my trafficker and said, why would you want to be with a girl like that? And that was enough for me to have no trust to law enforcement. That was enough to build up so much shame. And I was sitting in that jail cell thinking, this is as low as it can ever get. And every time I thought that, it got worse. And they sent a female officer in to talk to me because I was just nonstop. I was crying so much. And that would have been a perfect opportunity. There were so many opportunities for professionals and adults to intervene and see something. But just with what that officer said to my trafficker, I wasn't going to talk. And I remember sitting there thinking, gosh, if they only knew who I was, that, just months before this, I was a girl headed to play college volleyball. I was a star athlete at my school, and I had good friends and good grades and a nice family. But so much shame started, and my self-esteem just plummeted. And so after that first night, I didn't think I had any options. And this didn't happen every weekend. This didn't happen every night. Sometimes a month would go by before it would happen again. There was never a conversation of this is what we're going to do for a while. There was never a beating. So sometimes I would think, oh, that's just something that he did, and we're going to go on, and life will be kind of like how he portrays life to his parents. And there was a time in the middle of this year that we asked survivors, why didn't you run? I just gave some examples, but he opened the front door to the apartment and he said, leave, Jenna. If you want out of here so bad, if you don't want to be here, then go. And I started to walk out the front door, and I stopped myself and I went, where? And he knew exactly what he was doing there too, because I didn't think I could go home. I didn't know there was safe houses or people that would protect me. I didn't think I could go back to college. I had no idea what my options were. And then the last night that I was sold, it was different. It was always in the apartment, and this time it was in a motel room. And that really scared me. That was enough to scare me, thinking, how far is he going to take this? Like, he was clearly going to keep going with this. And all of the rapes were awful, but this was the most horrific. And it was the first time I experienced a beating. And the next morning, the buyer, after he left, I looked in the mirror and I couldn't even recognize myself. And I was scared that I would die, or that this would just keep getting worse. And not long after this, I had a phone call with one of my big sisters. And, she didn't know what was happening to me. She just knew I was married to a not so great guy. And she said something on the phone that didn't occur to me until she said it. And she said, Jenna, you can always come home. And then it got me thinking, I'm like, I can. And so long story short, I did get away from him and get a divorce. I really promised him that I would never tell anybody. And I was afraid of him, and I think he really thought I would never talk about it. But I really did want help. And I went to an urgent care. And by this time, you know, I had been trafficked for a year. And when I showed up at the urgent care, I was around 100 pounds. My hair was falling out in clumps. I had my branding, various stages of bruising, really obvious physical signs that I had been through trauma, but also emotional. I mean, was experiencing PTSD pretty highly, and not one doctor or nurse was asking me. You know, they were all talking around me and nobody was talking to me. And there was this assumption that I was some runaway teen on drugs or whatever it was, which even if I was, I needed services and resources. And all I needed in that moment was somebody to create a safe place for me to open up and talk about what had happened. I needed somebody to tell me what happened to me. I needed to hear what you survived was human trafficking and it's not your fault. And here's, you know, programs that will help you, people that will keep you safe. These are the steps we can take. We will help you go back to school. Like, that's all I wanted. I wanted that dream of going and playing college volleyball didn't just go away. That's what I really wanted. But nobody was creating that space for me. So I really thought I would go the rest of my life without ever telling anybody. And that was my plan. And I went on, I self-medicated in unhealthy ways, a lot of drinking, dabbling in drugs, being promiscuous. But eventually I met a man and fell in love and we got married. He was a Marine and he then got deployed to Iraq for 9 months. And when he came back, we got stationed to Quantico Marine Base in Virginia. And for me, that was like the golden ticket. Like, yes, I get to go away where nobody knows me, knows anything about me. And I can start this new life in Virginia. And when we arrived in Virginia, I found out we were pregnant with our son. And, you know, I was really creating this new life for myself. I loved being a military wife. I loved meeting new friends. I loved where I lived. I loved, you know, being pregnant and becoming a mom. And then during my pregnancy, I found out that my trafficker died. And I've also gotten a lot of questions about that. You know, a lot of people would ask, well, didn't that make you feel like almost excited or happy or like you got justice? And in no way did I feel those things. For me, I remember picturing his funeral and everyone getting up on stage and talking about him and all how wonderful he was. And that made me feel regret. And I got really, really angry. I thought, wow, now nobody will ever know. And I have to live with this secret forever. But it did lead me to go to therapy. The thing is, when I started going to therapy, I was not honest with my therapist. I talked about how I had an abusive husband. I talked about the sexual abuse I experienced from him. But I never brought up the trafficking part. I never brought up any of the rapes. And so I wasn't really getting any healing because I wasn't really talking about it. But then for a couple years, you know, life was pretty good for the most part. I was experiencing PTSD, nightmares and flashbacks and a lot of anxiety, but I just became very good at stuffing it down and covering it up and acting like everything was fine and just trying to deal with it on my own. And then 2 years after that, so this is 6 years after being trafficked, I had a routine doctor's appointment, and every pelvic exam that I'd had up to this point since being trafficked, I always acted the same way. I always had pretty much just a big panic attack. And nobody talked to me about it, so I just assumed that, you know, it's uncomfortable and every woman experiences that. And no, you know, it's not comfortable, but you don't have full-blown panic attacks. And it wasn't until this doctor's appointment, after the appointment, she called me into her office and she said, Jenna, have you ever been sexually abused? And it was like, whoa, how do you know? because I thought, well, I went to the doctors after just getting away from my trafficker, looking the way I did, and nobody said anything. Here I am 6 years later. I appear healthy and happy and totally fine. How does she know my secret? And it wasn't like I just opened up and said, yes, all these horrible things happened to me, help me. But what she did, just by recognizing signs and asking me that, she planted a seed. And a few months after that, I had a breakdown and I went to the emergency room and I said, I need help. I don't feel suicidal. I don't even really feel depressed, but there's some things that happened to me and I want to talk to somebody, thinking that they would give me a different kind of therapist or maybe send me to a psychiatrist. And they described this place. The best way, the movie, anybody seen the movie Girl Interrupted with about the mental hospital with Angelina Jolie? Well, when she was talking about this place, that's what I was picturing. And I was like, there is no way I am going there. You guys, I would rather go home and deal with this than I am not signing up for that. But after some more conversation, it sounded like it was the place for me and that it would help me. So I agreed to go. And then what happened next was a really actually traumatic for me. My husband and my son, who was 2 at the time, were in the ER room with me. And they brought in the stretcher and they strapped me down to the stretcher and, the gurney. And I remember laying there strapped down. And it felt kind of the same way that it felt when I was in the jail cell. Like I was the bad guy, that I was the one that was causing trouble, that I was going to hurt somebody or myself or whatever it may be. And it just crying, looking at my little boy and thinking, God, I take this back. I don't want to go, being really terrified. And when I arrived at this hospital, it was just as scary as I imagined. There was women screaming and crying and in padded rooms. And my thought was, do whatever you have to do to get out of here as fast as you can. So just comply, do whatever they tell you to do so they will let you go home. And so that's what I did. So I was not opening up. I was going to the therapies, but I was not really talking. None of my trafficking experience came up. And when I saw the psychiatrist, he said, Jenna, you're really high functioning. I think you're ready to go home. You can go home and be with your husband and kid at night, but come back for day therapy during the day. And he sent me home on anxiety and depression medicine. I had never been on any medicine before. And even though I wasn't talking, my trauma was all coming up. Like it was all really, I was remembering everything I'd blocked out and I was having really intense nightmares. And I was on this medication and I was at home and my husband, it was in the early hours of the morning and he had already gone off to work. My son was sleeping in his room. And I had a nightmare so vivid that I felt like I was 18-year-old Jenna again. And I kind of in a haze walked downstairs to the kitchen. I grabbed the anxiety medicine. I poured all of it in my hand and I swallowed. And then I grabbed the depression medicine and I poured all of it in my hand. And then I poured half back and swallowed half. And I remember thinking, I don't want to die. And then what I did next was I walked around my entire house. It was a 2-story house. And I opened every blind and every curtain. And I turned on every light switch. And I didn't know what I was doing then. Looking back now, it was like me saying to the world, somebody please see me and help me and listen to me. And I, long story short, I went to outpatient care that day. And I passed out. I was taken to the emergency room. They filled me with charcoal and did out everything for my overdose. And so I ended up from there back into inpatient care. And I remember this day, I was sitting there like in the common area and this woman who was in the group therapies from my first visit there, I had heard some of her story. Some of the things that had happened to her were similar to what happened to me. And she was sitting in the corner kind of like rocking and just holding herself and rocking and just there was nobody there. And I was watching her and thinking, God, if I don't get this out of me, I'm going to end up like her or dead. There's some statistics out there, that trafficking survivors have a 7-year lifespan. I wasn't even in the life of trafficking anymore, and this was at the 6-year mark, and I was, breaking down and could have lost my life. And the next therapy that day was art therapy, and the therapist asked us to draw what we were afraid of, and she said, you can keep it in your binder or you can share it with class. And I drew stick figure men, and for the first time in 6 years, I held up my picture and said, I was married at 18 and he had men come and rape me and they paid him for it. I don't know what that means, but I'm afraid of men. And it was like, the truth will set you free. Like, whew, here it is. This is my truth. This is my story. And, in this mental hospital with barbed wire around it, where I could not leave on my own free will, I was free for the first time. And that was the first time I experienced some kind of freedom. There was more to come later. And I started really healing. The team went into action. Then I had somebody explain to me what I needed explained to me 6 years ago in that urgent care. What you survived was trafficking, and what you're experiencing is PTSD. And that, hearing that and understanding it, then I was able to heal and do the work and do all the different therapies. I had an incredible therapist who took extra time with me, would do all these amazing therapies with me. My case manager would sit and listen to me and talk to me and earn my trust. And that same psychiatrist that sent me home the first time even said that I could go home again. And I kept myself there. And that really was not a fun place. That's not a place you want to be, but I knew it was working and I knew it was the healing I needed. So then once I did get out of the hospital, we ended up getting stationed back to Camp Pendleton in Southern California. And I, was a little nervous about being kind of in the same area where I was trafficked, but, planned to go to therapy and keep working on it. And 4 months later, my husband left. So it was back to rock bottom. And that was an incredibly hard summer for me. Feeling suicidal again, not sure how to deal with, here I am trying to deal with my trafficking past. Now I'm having to learn, how to go through a divorce and have this heartbreak and my family being broken up. And then all these social issues that came with it, being a single mom, working 3 jobs, living in the ghetto, and so I did that. I worked at a ranch, I coached volleyball, and I raised my son. And, my apartment was gross and had cockroaches. And, but after 3 years of doing that, it just felt like there has to be something more, that, God has to have some kind of bigger plan for my life, that maybe, I could do something with what happened to me. And in the hospital, they did something that I recommend everybody do, no matter what your story is. We all have traumas and go through hardships. And they had me write my story down, and anything I could remember, from the time I was born to that moment. And I wrote it down. And what it did was put everything in perspective for me. My trafficking experience was this much of my life compared to how much life I had to live. And after reading it, I closed that notebook and I wrote book ? And so I had a high school English teacher that reached out to me and we started writing my book together. And then I thought, well, this place opened up on my family's ranch in Northern California. And I thought, if I move there, then I can pursue this and not work all these jobs. And I can really put my energy into doing this work and not knowing really what that meant and what this work would look like, and not having any connections. I hadn't yet met a trafficking survivor. And I quit my jobs and I packed everything I owned into a horse trailer. I was a little redneck, and I moved up to Northern California And then I sat there for like 6 months and like cried every day and was like, what did I do? I have no idea what I'm doing and I don't know how to do this. And that awesome big sister that I had that phone call with when I was leaving my trafficker, she's a professor, and she said, well, why don't you take a class? Even if your brain can only handle one class, just take it. So I took a sociology class, and that professor, this was 4 years ago. He has me speak with him and to his class today. I started volunteering for an anti-trafficking organization. They are no longer running, but then I started the Jenna McKaye Foundation, and I was like, how do I want to do this? Horses, yes. Horses helped me. That was a huge part of my therapy. So I got them going to a certified horse therapist for therapy, and then I started speaking, and I would walk into any organization or church or business and say, hi, I'm Jenna. And whoever would let me share my story, I would just share. And I did that for a long time, which then, led to keynote speeches and being paid for those speeches and training hospital staff and law enforcement and all the people that once failed me, saying, this is what we should do different, pretty much. And I just got hired by the United Nations to do their trainings, and I'll speak there and choose what to do. And thank you. And I love sharing that, because look what happens when a community comes around a survivor. That's what happens when we give victims and survivors opportunity. And because we all had dreams before we were trafficked, we all had goals. We're all incredibly smart. I know so many survivors that are incredibly smart, and they can do it. They can become doctors and lawyers and teachers and vets, and have healthy marriages and be great moms. And that's why it's so important for us to identify victims. So so what happened to me, where nobody was identifying me or doing anything about it, I mean, look what could have happened to me, and look how long my healing journey took. Somebody shouldn't have to wait 6 years before getting help. And and I've also come to a place in my healing where I've forgiven, and I respect every survivor has their healing journey, but for me, I was so angry for so many years that it was causing a problem in all my relationships in my life. It was making me like fight mode when nobody was doing anything to me. I was just on the fence to protect myself from getting hurt. And so I would see my romantic relationships fail and my friendships fail, and I didn't want that anymore. So I forgave my trafficker and the men that bought and raped me over time, but that doesn't mean I'd invite them over for Sunday dinner.
Right.
It means I am free from them, and I get to be free and live my life and be happy, and they don't have any part of it anymore. And so I'm thankful.
That is amazing. Okay, your story is so powerful, and thank you for sharing and being so vulnerable. It's, to me, very obvious why you now have keynote speeches, because like you touched on so many things that I think is important. We do have some questions, and if you guys have questions, feel free to ask if you have any more. But I just wanted to like touch on a couple of things that you said, like the importance of, I love everything you're doing, by the way, amazing. The importance of training like the medical staff, and that is huge, because I've heard so many stories of survivors who went to the hospital and they just weren't asked anything, and they were like, that was a missed opportunity that someone could have identified. And I know that our statistics for victim identification is not good. It's not where it needs to be. The branding of the tattoo branding, I know that's a very prominent thing. I don't know if you guys know that watching, but that is something, I know you just touched on it, is traffickers like to brand their victims with tattoos and claim them as their own. And so thank you for touching on that. I know that happened to you, so that is a part of your story. But wow, your story is very powerful. And the other thing too is that we've talked about is that it doesn't end when you're out of it. Like, your journey is not over. Like you were just explaining, there's so much healing and stuff. Things like you said that you stuffed down. I've talked to so many survivors who like that, they'll have a breakdown because it'll be like a memory that comes back that they didn't even know was there, but it just surfaces. And so thank you for sharing all like the back end, like the healing and stuff after, because it's I think it's hard for people to grasp, like there's so much that comes after and there's so much need there, you know. So
and the medical staff, I mean, they say that they did a big survey with survivors, and 88% of survivors saw some kind of medical staff, doctor or nurse, while they were being trafficked, and never was offered any support, was never identified. 88%. They say it takes 8 to 12 contacts with law enforcement before they finally feel safe enough and trust them that they can reach out for help. So training law enforcement, hey, the guy with the gun on the head, hey, you got to know how to be trauma informed and create that space for that victim, because you're often the first point of contact. I saw law enforcement all the time when I was being trafficked, and was often shamed and judged. And the healing journey, the hard work really begins once you get away. So we have to be providing victims, you know, for them to become survivors and heal. It's what works for them. You know, one girl, you know, horse therapy she may love. I have a girl that goes every week and it's super incredibly healing. And one girl doesn't. She wants to do normal therapy, which I love too. I'm like, I still go to therapy every week. I love therapy. And I found the great therapist too that works for me. But, you know, whatever their healing journey looks like and whatever their dreams are, hey, do you want to go back to school? You want to get your GED, go to college? I'll help you do that. So it's really important. So.
Yeah, incredible. So let me ask you a couple of questions. So someone said, these questions came in while you're talking. So do you think it was a calculated plan that your boyfriend had over a long period of time, or do you think it was something sporadic that he just decided to do on a whim?
I definitely don't think, you know, when he was in high school that he knew anything about doing this. You know, he was involved in a lot of theft, big time theft. He would grow and sell marijuana out of the apartment. This was 2006. He was selling prescription drugs, you know, hanging out with gangs. But it wasn't until after he got away out of high school, that could have been where it started. For me, it wasn't until that trip to Vegas where I started to see the difference, where the sexual abuse became worse with him, where it almost seemed like that's where he got the idea. But like I said, he could have definitely known it sooner, but I don't think it was until he got out of high school.
Okay. And then someone said, what did he say to you afterwards to justify what he did?
So there wasn't really, I was just terrified of him. There was never an apology. You know, there really, it was more talks of, well, just, you know, deal with this. It's not going to happen again. Or it could be so much worse. Or do you want us to go into debt? Really kind of just piling anything he could, thinking of anything he could to put the weight on me. But it also, the way that I was trafficked, it was really like I know he advertised me on Craigslist and chat rooms. Like that was the big thing at the time. And without getting into too much detail, these chat rooms were people with weird fetishes. And it was kind of like he advertised, hey, pay this amount of money and come rape my wife. It wasn't like I showed up in a room all glamorous and then proceeded, that was still victimization, but that's not how I experienced my trafficking. And I just was shocked, and just, like I said, it wasn't happening every night. So it wasn't, I often thought, you know, a month would go by and I thought, oh, that's not going to happen anymore. Yeah.
And then the other thing that you said, I think, let me refresh this, but the other thing that you said too that I think is important is you were saying how, like, you're like 15 minutes away from the school you went to and stuff. And I think that's a really big misconception as well, that you'll be taken out. Like, it's not always like that. Of course, that's some people's story where they're taken out of state, but it's not always like that. So I think that's important as well for you to touch on. And is there anything else you want to share or give advice to? And if people who aren't in the medical field or law enforcement, things that they could do to help, to spot, to report?
Yeah. I get so excited. I so appreciate everyone that's here listening, because it is important for every community to understand trafficking, but more So what trafficking looks like in their community, because the way it happens in Sacramento looks different than the way it happens in Alabama or New York or the Philippines, right? And traffickers get their victims based on somebody's vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities are different in each community based on the culture in that community. Like, I'm from an agriculture town. There's a lot of not just sex trafficking, but labor trafficking here. So we have to start at home, start in our communities, go to trainings, get educated, go to reliable resources, get the facts, and learn how to identify victims and then what to do. Another part of that is just human kindness. Like, how many times, somebody looked me in the eye, I would keep people's glare. Like, I'm like, can you see me? Like, can you tell that something bad is happening to me? Will you call? I can't call 911 for myself. Can you do it for me? Recognize all those signs and to know what to do. And just show that kindness when you're being raped and dehumanized and treated as an object every day. To have somebody take the time and care about you is so big and life-changing. And there were people that, unfortunately I had many people pass me by, but eventually people came into my life that did change my life and did help me and keep me alive. And, I have an amazing 10-year-old little boy, and I get to be a mom too because of that. And so it's just so important. And, figure out what if you go to RebeccaBender.org, she has this little quiz that you can take, and it's called Find Your Lane. And you go through and answer all these questions, and you find what your talent is that you can do in the anti-trafficking field, right? We all have different, talents that we can use. So not everybody's going to do policy or prevention or trainings or speaking or whatever it is. Sometimes it may be volunteering. Sometimes it's, there's so many avenues to go into. So that kind of helps you narrow it down and figure out how you can get involved.
I love that. I'm gonna type that in here real quick. So I love Rebecca Bender too. She's great.
Yeah.
It's .org or .com?
I think it's RebeccaBender.org. Yeah.
.org. Okay. And then someone else just said thank you for sharing your story, which we all thank you. You could definitely tell that you are just very, besides obviously being that tough story, that you've used it and turned it around, and you're just a powerhouse. Like, you're just using it to help, and we need all the training that we could get. And I love what you said about how it's different in each community. Incredible. And I did want to ask Kayla if you have anything. I don't want to not ask you that. If you have anything to say or ask.
I don't have anything to ask. I do just want to thank you for your time and for sharing your story. For me, like, I'm only a few years out of my trafficking, and it's so encouraging just for me to hear your story. I had no idea of the statistic of like the one you said, like, most trafficking survivors, their life expectancy is only 7 years out of that. Like, I heard that and my heart dropped to my toes. And like, so like, it's just so like what you're sharing about and everything is so inspiring to even just me and, people that I'm sharing it to on my platform and stuff. So, and it's really cool, just like the hippotherapy and everything that you're doing. Like, that is a huge, like, I know so many girls who have found hippotherapy to be so helpful. So keep doing it. I'm so excited to hear about your United Nations, like, connection and everything. Like, you're going to do awesome things. And I'm so happy and excited for you. And like, hearing your like comeback story is amazing. So thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you. Every time I hear that somebody is a survivor, like, I feel this instant bond. I'm like when she said, I try not to get all weird. Like, I'm like, compose yourself. I'm like, oh, I love you. Because I just feel this like, oh, like, we just understand on a different level. And I think it's amazing that I would love to hear your story sometime. And it's so awesome that you've joined the movement, and keep it up. And I hope we can connect, maybe social media.
Definitely.
And for anybody watching too, if you go to JennaMcKaye.com, McKaye with the E at the end. I kept my ex-husband's name, and that E is a pain in the butt. There's JennaMcKaye.com. You can kind of keep up to date on that, or follow me on Instagram or any other social media. So thank you, Kayla.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. I just put your website, so go follow her, guys. And thank you for tuning in. There's some more people just saying thank you. And we do just want to say thank you so much for sharing and your story. And we really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share with us. And it's also, we're going to share it on Instagram after, so it'll be everywhere so you can share it out. And again, thank you so much. We really, 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 really appreciate your time and value your story.
Thank you. And thank you for all your hard work and all that you're doing. I'll have to come to Alabama sometime.
Yes, we have a room. Kayla knows. Don't tell anyone else, even though we're online. All right, ladies. Thank you so much.
Bye.